What's under Antarctica? We don't know yet, but there's evidence that there's a really big crater under the ice in Antarctica. Well, like I said, there's about 200 craters and astroblems that have been identified on Earth.
How are you able to date when an asteroid hits the Earth? Do you know how many times the Earth has been struck by some type of a meteor or a comet?
That's what I'm getting at.
Perfect.
That's exactly what I'm laying it out so that, right? So here's the thing. If you have an event like Tunguska, 100 years from now, there won't be any trace of it. The trees that were knocked down will have all been rotted away, and there's new forests growing there, right? And we wouldn't even know about it, right? Whereas the Arizona event, Meteor Crater, that happened some 50,000 years ago. So that big hole in the ground is still there, right? And we can see it, we can count it. Well, like I said, there's about 200 craters and astroblems that have been identified on Earth.
200.
About 200 now is the census. Now,
I just have another question
Sure.
real quick. How are you able to date when an asteroid hits the Earth?
well, there's a number of different ways. You know, optically stimulated luminescence is probably the main way now that you can date rocks. But, you know, you can use relative dating where if you know like, for example, if you got layers of soil,
okay,
right, and you go out and you dig a hole, right, now you come back afterwards and you look at that hole and okay, we've cut through this layer, but not this layer. So we know it's younger than this layer, right?
Got it.
Now let's say we've got remains of life forms in there that we can date. Well, now we can date some of these layers. Or optically stimulated luminescence, not to OSL dating, not to try to get into a technical discussion on that, but it basically is that you have certain atomic structures that are reset when they're exposed to light. So if you've got a crystal that's buried, what's happening is it's through radiocarbon process. It's decaying and producing byproducts.
Okay.
Right? And by measuring the ratio of the precursor material and the byproducts, and you know how long that rate of transition is occurring, you can now get a relative date. The younger stuff, like the other way is this. Okay, so you dig that hole and you go away, and now things start, wind blows, things blow into the hole, plant life falls into it and it starts filling up, right? Well, then you can go and you can maybe date the stuff that's in there, in the hole. And if you go back and you pull up and you do core samples and you take and you date those, and the oldest dates turn up to be 50,000 years old, that's probably going to give you an indication of when it happened. And that's kind of how they dated the Arizona thing. Now,
okay.
the 1908 event, that was witnessed. So, I mean, there are accounts of that. But here's the thing I'm getting at. The lower density objects are about 10 times more abundant than the iron objects. So, and then when you look at the actual craters and astroblems, most of those are on places where there's fairly dense human habitation: Europe, Scandinavia, Canada, the U.S., Russia. More and more of them are being found in Russia. What's under Antarctica? We don't know yet, but there's evidence that there's a really big crater under the ice in Antarctica. What about the bottom of the oceans, which is almost 3/4 of the planetary surface? For every one that's going to hit the ground on land, there's going to be 3 that hit the ocean. And so now you have marine geologists who are reevaluating evidence for large-scale tsunamis that have made landfall and thinking that some of those are too big to have been formed by simply undersea volcanic eruptions, and may be the result of, a half-kilometer or kilometer-wide object plunging into the ocean that's moving, at 20 miles per second, right? Mm-hmm. But my point, and this is the takeaway, is that the events like Tunguska that don't leave a lasting impression are way more abundant than the ones that dig holes in the ground. So if you're just counting holes in the ground or scars in the surface of the earth itself, you're going to be undercounting. That's my point. So we're kind of in a position now of reevaluating just how many times perhaps we have been affected in the past. And here's again, now we turn to astromythology or geomythology, and we have hundreds of accounts from all over the world of things that once you got this picture in your mind of what an event like that would be, it sounds like that's what they're talking about.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How many do you happen to know how many documented cases are maybe within the past, I don't know, 200 years?
Of impact type events?
Yes.
Well, the big one, of course, was 1908.
Okay.
But there's also evidence now of a similar event happening over Brazil in the 1930s.
Really?
Yeah. There's also evidence that there might have been a similar type event, maybe even bigger, over New Zealand.
What is the evidence?
Well, the evidence, and the first thing, like in the Brazil event, that was, who was it? I think it was some Catholic priests that were going in there to try to convert the natives, and they started hearing these tales. And then later, some scientists went in there and they found what looked like that there had actually been 3 strikes of like 3 objects that came in together. And individually, each one was smaller than the 1908 event, but taken together, the total energy released may have been in that scale.
Wow.
And I mean, there's the evidence is accumulated. There's a researcher, a geomythologist named Bruce Massey, who's done some incredible work on studying, and it's come to the conclusion that these events are far more frequent than anybody had imagined, 20 or 30 years ago.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, I've got it all documented here. So when, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've spent pretty much every hour of my spare time for 40 years collecting this stuff.
It's interesting.
And I visited just about all of the craters in America, a couple of them in Canada, but there's a lot more. I've done, in fact, there's a chain of them across the Midwest. I think it's at about the 34th parallel. I think there's 8 of them. And it might have been a multiple impact event. Now, this would have been a long time ago before humans, but like, imagine, do you remember the 1994 July? Do you remember Shoemaker Levy 9? Think about when there was a multiple impact into Jupiter. I think it was the second week of July in 1994.
I do not remember that.
What were you doing in 1994?
I was probably in middle school.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.